Welcome to Bandana Wednesday. Today we are trying this new tech to combat the heat, which is putting something wet on your head. This seems to be working quite fine at the moment. What instead wasn't working perhaps nearly as fine were the tier sets released a few days ago on the PTR, because we have gotten already some significant changes to the tier sets, of which we have already talked about in the past couple of days, yesterday in particular for the DPS, since some of these have been drastically changed. However, before we talk about the actual tier set changes, there have also been some balance tuning changes to the actual specs rather than the tier sets. And the first in line is Death Knight, in particular Frost Death Knight. So while they have received some talent numbers here and there, not too relevant, like Runic Empowerment now having a 1.8% chance to grant your rune instead of a 1.6% chance per runic power, or things like slightly more effectiveness of your Glacial Advance cast through Killing Machine, these are more minor. What is more relevant was the flat out 10% aura buff given to Frost DK. Now this is also one of the least relevant ones, because balance tuning is the one that can change more, right? We are obviously more interested in things like tier set changes and even talent changes, because these can be more permanent and can change your spec more than very simply Blizzard tuning this knob, this value knob by 10% to give you a 10% buff as a DK. On top of this, right now is not what matters to Death Knight, since they are currently in an ongoing open revolt against Blizzard due to their lack of raid buffs. They have now started a campaign of protesting against Blizzard for not giving them their the desired raid buff, especially taking away their Abomination Limb. On top of that, wasn't really well liked by the players of Death Knight. The other one that is getting a relevant change is Monk. Brewmaster Monk is getting a, you were already moving towards starting to pick these Invoke News Out talents, likely possibly moving away from your entire Breath of Fire line right here to pick these one up. Now it's gotten even more enticing, because they added a tiny bit of an extra to this one in the middle, especially being a double talent pointer, which is quite costly. Now you also get a 1 minute CD off your news out. This is still broken, the tooltip. It still says 2.5. It goes from 3 to 2 minutes now, your invoke news out. So it's a good extra to a line of talent you might have already started wondering to pick up, that will be added in 11.2. It's now available in the PTR to make you tankier. There's been some extra additions to the Brewmaster talents to increase your tankiness, and this is an extra, the addition of the 60-second cooldown to your news up. That's the other major change to Monk. Same balance tuning knob change for Shadow, except now it goes in the opposite direction of Frost DK, and this direction is a nerf. You get a 5% aura nerf for Shadow, and you don't exactly get much of anything in return, especially some of the more complained about talents in this mini rework going to Shadow. They're not exactly getting touched whatsoever. You're just really getting a 5% overall damage nerf for now. Now, besides the classes, now you have the actual changes to the tier sets. We start with some of the ones we have talked for being quite weak or disappointing. First of all is Dark Ranger. Dark Ranger gets more CD to your major cooldown for Hunter, both Call of the Wild for BM and True Shot for MM. This is relevant because prior to this was tied to the amount of casts of your Black Arrow. So in between your True Shots, for example, you will get a 1 second CD per cast of Black Arrow. So in between True Shots, you will be getting something like a 14 CDR of True Shot. Now with this change, you're getting a 30-second CD of True Shot. This is very relevant because thanks to this, marksmanship is already getting some 30-second CDR from your 2-minute true shot with calling the shots. With this new change, you're getting practically a full 1-minute CDR on your true shot, which is very handy because it allows you now to properly line up your 2-minute CDs with true shot. Right now, you have this very annoying thing where you have your true shot on pull and then 90 seconds later, and then you have to delay your 2-minute trinket because you can't use it until your true shot is back. And because your true shot has a 90-second cooldown, you have to essentially delay your 2-minute trinket by a full minute. This will now no longer be necessary next season because you can now line up your true shot every minute and therefore also line up your trinkets every minute as well. Same logic for the Call of the Wild cooldown of BM. The further buff, this is slightly more relevant, is that Withering Fire's Black Arrow damage is increased by 50% instead of 25%. It's not nearly as big as a 2-piece change. What is even larger is the change to Sentinel, which has turned this tier set into an OP one, especially for survival. So we haven't gotten through the tier set of survival when we went through the melee ones, but it's the same as the one for marksmanship. So now the 2-piece gets a flat damage increase, 25% for rapid fire and 10% for wildfire bomb. This is already like a flat 3% more damage done. Just like that. Just this point. On top of this, survival gets an even larger buff because prior to this, the 2 next wildfire bombs you would gain after Lunar Storm ends were gaining a 60% damage increase. Now they are gaining a 150% damage increase, even if it is just their initial damage rather than all of the wildfire bomb. It is still better for the very simple fact that your initial damage is still quite larger than your dot. So buffing both by 60% like it was before is worse than buffing the first one by 160% like it will be, or 150% like it will be now. So it's already a pretty solid like 6+% damage buff change from the previous version of this 2-piece, which gets even stronger with the 4-piece. Now, instead of this extra stacks of Sentinel when you consume your Boon of Elune buff, instead now the Boon of Elune is now active for the duration of Lunar Storm. So Boon of Elune is this. Boon of Elune is when Lunar Storm ends, you gain Boon of Elune buffing your next 2 wildfire bombs, etc, etc. Now this is active even during Lunar Storm. This is super relevant because for those who don't play Sentinel or don't know about Sentinel, Lunar Storm is what procs every 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, your next wildfire bomb or your next aim shot create this 12-second window where you do basically more damage with Sentinel. Sentinel is very similar to the Hellcaller ticking damage of Wither. The stacks that keep racking up and then they have a chance to explode for damage is basically the same thing. And once this ended, your next 2 wildfire bombs would be empowered. However, now with the 4-piece, the entire duration of Lunar Storm will also give you this buff. This is now made Sentinel's tier set very powerful for survival. They are already having fun posting their results of the massive damage of their bombs, giving upwards of 1/3 of your total damage by double dipping in the damage increases. If you save the damage increase of Boon of Elune at the end of Lunar Storm and then you enter a new Lunar Storm, saving the damage buff of the 2-piece into the next Lunar Storm, this is currently double dipping. It's currently stacking on top of itself for even more damage, which is probably what is gonna get fixed. However, now Sentinel is also very, very strong. Now, Mage. We mentioned yesterday Mage was the biggest loser of the tier set for range DPS, so we need to expect some significant changes for their tier sets. We aren't getting really many meaningful ones for the Frostfire 2-piece. Yes, Frostfire Bolt now is also included in this, which is good, but whatever. The change one is that now your chance to cast, 20% chance if you're fire to get a Glacial Spike off, and 100% chance to cast a Pyro when you cast Glacial Spike as a Frost Mage. Now the damage is tripled, because before you were getting a Pyro off at 100% effectiveness. Sure, but Pyroblast is not exactly a very high base hitting spell. It's a 235% spell power damage spell. Now instead the base damage is 700%, 705%, which is exactly 3 times as much damage as a base Pyro, or 3 times as much damage as a base Glacial Spike. So they practically tripled the damage of the 4-piece set bonus of Frostfire, which is good. The tier set itself has not turned into some OP kind of tier set, but it's now a reasonable one. Where you don't get nearly as big of a set of buffs is to Spellslinger, because we mentioned amongst the L's racked up by Mage, Spellslinger was the most normal one. So you now get as Arcane a 100% chance to stack Arcane Harmony when you do Splinter damage, which is great. No more RNG, it's guaranteed to always stack up Arcane Harmony. And on top of that, now you have base 8% more damage to your Splinter, and now every time your Arcane Orb is cast, you gain 8 stacks of Arcane Harmony max instead of 5. Both of these are good buffs, they are solid buffs, they're not insane or major, but they make the tier set stronger, and it was already a decent tier set. Where we have the biggest question was in the disaster that was Sunfury. We mentioned last time it was awful because the entire logic around this tier set was to give you a haste and damage increase buff at the end of your Arcane Surge or at the end of your combustion, which made no sense because you wanted your power inside of your cooldowns, not right after they ended. So we need to see some relevant changes for this tier set. Now for the 2-piece, the damage is certainly increased. Spellfire Sphere's spell damage bonus is increased by 2% instead of 1%, and Mana Cascade now grants an additional 0.5% of a haste per stack, instead of this 1 in 4 chance of your Arcane Phoenix to cast an exceptional spell without consuming a Spellfire Sphere. This is good. It's more damage increase, it's free damage, but it doesn't help the tier set from being dead on arrival if the 4-piece doesn't change. Now, the 4-piece. The 4-piece changes, and it now reads: exceptional spells cast by your Phoenix add an additional second to the duration of your next Arcane Soul or your next Hyperthermia. And then when your Phoenix expires, you gain the buff now upwards of 13 seconds long instead of 10. So this is now changed in a very deliberate manner to extend your burst window by twice as much. For those who don't play Fire or even Arcane, your Hyperthermia, the thing that you get at the end of your combustion if you play Sunfury, is the thing that allows you to spam Pyro, because when you gain Hyperthermia, Pyro is instant and is guaranteed to crit. So you keep gaining hot streak after hot streak because you just keep critting with Pyro and you just keep casting Pyro. So prior to this, even with the base older version of this one, you were only getting a 7-second long Hyperthermia because you didn't have the extension. However, with this change, now you can have upwards of a 12 seconds long Hyperthermia, because you start with 3 Spellfire Spheres, you play with Ronduromancy to give you an upward of 5 Spellfire Spheres. Now each of the spheres consumed by your Phoenix gives you 2 more seconds of Hyperthermia. You consume 5 spheres, you get 10 seconds of Hyperthermia. The base duration of Hyperthermia is 2 seconds. That's a 12-second long Hyperthermia. So you end up having this extra burst window at the end of your combustion. And of course, it's not a problem that you ended combustion, you have no Fire Blast charges, you have no Phoenix Flame charges, because in Hyperthermia you can just spam Pyro. Or if you are in AoE and you're playing the Flame Strike build, you can just spam Flame Strike. Same for Arcane. Arcane simply gets Arcane Soul instead, which still allows them to spam Arcane Barrage. So now, the only deficit now to this tier set, which has turned into a very, very powerful one, is the fact that it is locking you into this playstyle where your burst window is now like 25 plus seconds long. And it's not that often that you need 25 seconds long, 25 plus seconds long of burst damage. For primary prio targets in the raid, for mythic plus packs, this might be a bit too long, too much of an overkill, basically, sometimes. But hey, from your tier set, it's basically free. Every time you combust, you get this off at the end of it anyways. So it has turned into a very, very powerful tier set for Mage compared to the absolute terribleness that this was before. Although the slight annoyance of making your burst window even longer and locking you into playing this hyperthermia playstyle is there. You might not enjoy this, it might not be optimal still, but it's obviously much better than what you had at the beginning of the PTR with the original Sunfury Tier Set. After this, you have the last one, which will be a nerf, the Stormbringer Tier Set that gave you Ascendance. Prior to the nerf, you only needed 3 Awakening Storm procs to activate. Now you need 6 Awakening Storm procs to activate, and even when it does activate, you get 5 seconds of Ascendance instead of 6 seconds of Ascendance. Now, disregarding the first part, which was likely a typo, it was still supposed to proc every 6 Awakening Storm anyways instead of every 3, the Ascendance has been cut down by 1 second for Elemental over the version of Ascendance for Enhancement. Elemental was likely being able to cook up a bit more with Ascendance in that short window compared to Enhancement, especially in AoE, and this has been rained down with this change for Elemental. Anyways, with these changes, you have the fix in the PTR so far when it comes to tier sets and when it comes to balance tuning. Of course, it's good to see that not even a day after we have made our recap and complaint set of tier sets for being too weak or being too poor, unimaginative or disappointing, we have already gotten pretty much 2 of them turned upside down. The one for Hunter, Sentinel, has been significantly improved, and the one for Mage, Sunfury, has also been significantly improved. We also had a few other things here and there, like the flat buff to Frost DK, as well as the flat nerf to Shadow, and some continued good vibes for Brewmaster. It's going in our Hopium angle, is going under the radar, it's not being noticed too much. Maybe we end up in a bizarre world where Brewmaster actually gets to be the tankiest tank and the more stable tank next season, which is always a good starter for having the main chance, the main hope at being a relevant meta tank in Mythic Plus next season. But for today though, on this Wednesday, this is what we had for the balance tuning changes on the PTR for Season 3, for patch 11.2, when it came mostly to the changes of the tier sets planned for next season. So, for today though, it's now time to leave each other. We are starting as usual the goodbyes. We're thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with of course everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, the only problem is that when you wet this and you put it on your head, after like 15 minutes, the water that was in there starts getting warm, and now your head gets even warmer.